The Chusky Boys!
And this is Chad with Hemlock. What does a Chusky Boy looks like?
Chusky Boys, what's that?
Chusky Boys, not to be confused with Husky Boys.
The Chusky Boys.
I believe y'all guys are listening to the Chusky Boys.
This is William Duvall, and you are listening to the Chusky Boys.
All right, Chusky listeners, we're at episode 23. We had to pivot today. We had to make some adjustments, and we are very, very excited and happy and enthused and all of the above with the 12-hour notice to have the photographer of many of the bands that we love, that we continue to talk about, being at Alice in Chains, Metallica, et cetera, et cetera. We could go on, and we'll get into it with Mr. Paul Jendrasiak.
Yeah, you got it.
How are you, Paul?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on.
I think it's important to say thank you for jumping on at such short notice. And it was in the cards to have you on probably in a couple weeks. I think Dusty was the original plan. And the other person we had lined up get sick. That stuff still goes around. If it's COVID, bronchitis, etc., the flu. Who knows? So we can't stress enough that thank you so much for jumping on at very short notice, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Timing is everything.
So there's a connection. So, Paul, I'm not as familiar. I'll be very transparent. I think it's important for all of our Chusky listeners that we are always transparent. I'm not too familiar with your work. I'm getting caught up right now, Paul. Of course, I would have done all my due diligence if it wasn't a 12-hour notice to make sure I was a little bit more familiar with who our guests are. But I know Chusky Dusty and the sketchy goat, Carmen.
You call her a sketchy joke? What the hell, man?
That's a side
Don't
project.
edit that out. That's true. That's
leaving that in there. It's a heck of a lot more familiar with your work. So I'm going to kind of kick it over to them to kind of get us started. Dusty, why don't you go ahead, man?
Oh, I've been following Paul on his Instagram. So I follow pretty much any and everything. Grunge music, Alice in Chains, Jerry Cantrell, Pantera, I'm a huge fan of. And Paul, if you follow his social, his Instagram especially, he's got just insane pictures. Actually, we'll talk about it. He has giveaways, which I just entered a Lane Staley 1991 picture this afternoon. So I'm hoping Lady Luck strikes that. But I know the sketchy goat here, Carmen, she actually has one of Paul's super cool aluminum prints. And I'm probably going to order one of those for myself. I'm just seeing how badass they are. But yeah, Carmen, you could take off.
Well, basically, for our listeners, if you like music of any kind and really amazing pictures of things that make you happy, you're bound to have seen Paul's work. Dusty said I have one picture of Lane in particular that Paul's done. I'm going to pretend like I don't have 50. I made the joke earlier that I think Paul's responsible for taking most of my money in the past year, and it is so worth it. But just as a quick question, Paul, on your website, you do talk about your early draw to music. How did it go from being a big fan of really cool rock and roll guys like, Randy Rhoads and Eddie Van Halen to actually photographing these folks?
Well, in between that, I was interviewing folks, and so I was probably a few weeks outside of graduating high school in 1990. And there was a magazine in my town where I'm from, Grand Rapids, Michigan, called Music Review. It was kind of like the local Rolling Stone. And I thought, well, I wonder if I could get him an interview with Gene Simmons of Kiss, because Kiss was going to be coming through town in the next month. So called him up and talked to the guy who was the editor. He's like, oh, yeah, see what you can do. And I didn't have any experience. I didn't have any connections. And within a few days, I was able to make that happen, and was kind of the most intimidating experience of my life up to that point, talking to Gene Simmons. And I mean, I'm sure all of you have seen, Gene when he did that show Family Jewels. I mean, he has a certain way about him, and he is a bit intimidating. And so I guess I dove in at the deep end of the pool.
Yeah, you aimed low on the first one there. Only Gene Simmons.
Why not? I guess, aim high and see what you can get. And so I went on to interview a few other folks like Steve Vai, who was in White Snake at the time, because guitar was always a big thing for me. And then I was also going to shows, and I always enjoyed, the rock magazines like Hit Parade or Circus Magazine, the photographs in those. And I like the photography of folks like Niels Lozauer and Ken Settle. He's a photographer down by Detroit. And I thought, well, if I'm getting into these shows, maybe I could try to photograph them. And my dad gave me a camera that used to belong to my uncle back in the 50s. And I was like, well, give this a shot. And
it's a real film there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Everything back then that I shot in the 90s was film. And the first thing I photographed was Tim Allen, who you guys probably remember from Tool time.
Love that guy.
And Tim's also from Michigan. I think he's from Kalamazoo, maybe. And he also does the, I don't know if you guys have the Pure Michigan ads advertised there where you guys live.
I haven't seen them. No, JR and I are in Rapid City, Sturgis, South Dakota area, and the goats down south in Texas.
I do have friends in Lansing, so I'm always tell them about the Michigan connection.
So Tim's the voice of the Pure Michigan commercials, but that was the first show I photographed, and the first music show I photographed was the Black Crowes in October of '90, and I didn't even know that you got pit access, so most of the stuff I shot was from the balcony, and not even sure where the negatives are for that. I still got some of the prints, but I then, my dad took me to get I guess for lack of better words, a proper camera, went to the mall and got a Nikon and just, kind of figured out how to improve my shooting and was, pretty much, I guess, off to the races, as it were. And there was a club around where I lived called Club Eastbrook. It was a smaller venue, but you had a lot of really cool stuff coming through there at the time. So that was really the first venue that I shot at, and then started shooting stuff at arenas like down the road in Kalamazoo and in Detroit, and Pine Knob, which is in Detroit. And so wide array of music. I mean, I was kind of raised on hair metal since I was a teenager in the mid 80s. In the 90s, when I started shooting, especially 91, became a very transitional time, because that fall of 91, you had Nirvana, Pearl Jam, all that stuff. It was just
the shift.
It was a huge shift. It was like within a week or a day or whatever. And, nobody was playing Nirvana before that on these stations. And the next thing you know, Teen Spirit's all over the place. And, the Chili Peppers were taking off. And it was just, it was a pretty major deal. I mean, as far as, you would hear things from people like Janie Lane from Warrant, how, 1 week he went in.
Yeah, was it the Dirt poster?
Yeah, they had all their posters up 1 week for Warrant, went back like the next week, whatever, and it's like Alice in Chains. And, it just, those guys were obviously, touring the world, making good money, and it all came to kind of an abrupt stop. I mean, some of that stuff is kind of come back in vogue now, I think, is, people are getting older. They want to reconnect with the music of their youth in one way or another.
Yeah, there's that big tour going on with like Motley Crue and who is all that? They got postponed several times now. Poison,
it's Joan Jett, Poison, Motley Crue, and
Def Leppard.
Def Leppard. Yeah.
Nice.
So speaking of 91, Paul, so 1991, just looking at your pictures you have, you have some absolutely legendary pictures from 91. James Hetfield, Dimebag Darrell, Paul Simon, Shannon Hoon, the late great Lane Staley. Like, that was a pinnacle year for you, right? Because you said October 90, you did the Black Crowes, and then jump in just a few months later, you've got just a freaking insane year of 91. Is that, looking back at 91, is that kind of like what really, you dove in deep? Were you a full-time band photographer at that point by then?
Well, I was washing dishes too.
Oh, wow.
The other career.
Yes. Yeah, I was, paying my way through college. I mean, I spent a lot of money on film and all that back then. It's really night and day between film and digital. But 91, yeah, I mean, Metallica, the Black Album, that was November of 91, shot that show. And then you had Pearl Jam, Smashing Pumpkins, and Chili Peppers, that show, which was at Kalamazoo State Theater, very intimate venue. And, some of it, I mean, you at the time, I mean, what you're seeing is cool and there's something about it, but, you don't know where any of that's going to lead. You don't know what this band will or won't become. Pearl Jam, I don't think anybody really knew who Pearl Jam was at the time. I didn't. And, you could tell there was something about them, but it was like about a week or two later that I can't remember if it was Alive or Even Flow. That was all over the radio. And, Chili Peppers, people knew Chili Peppers, and especially from here, this area. Anthony was kind of sort of from here.
Not from California?
Yes and no. His dad moved to California, Blackie. And Anthony would spend time out there, and I think eventually lived out there at a certain point. But he did spend a fair amount of time in Grand Rapids. My former art teacher, one of the guys who got me into photography, had mentioned that I think he lived across from Anthony at one point when Anthony was a little boy. So it's always interesting sometimes when you run into people. And then years later, there'd be sightings because Anthony would come back to visit family. They'd see him at some restaurant, or they'd see him wandering around in some of the lakeshore towns. But he did spend a lot of time in California because his dad was an actor, and he was like in Lethal Weapon. I'm not sure what other movies, but the book he put out, I think it's Scar Tissue. I'm not sure if that's the name. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but I know he talks a lot about that in the childhood and stuff like that. So kind of a cool connection with that. But the Chili Peppers were headlining that show, kind of like a homecoming, and Smashing Pumpkins were middle of the bill. And, people knew who they were at a certain level, but Pearl Jam really hadn't, broken through in that way. Not yet at that point, but I still remember that show very vividly, and waiting for Pearl Jam to come on, and just how damp and cold it was in that venue because it was all creaky and drafty. And, but yeah, what an amazing show. So that's like going to be 32 years ago coming up in November.
Wow.
It's interesting because at the I guess it was last year, the anniversary of Gish, the Smashing Pumpkins' first album.
Yeah.
They had that big collection that went out. They had like a live thing they were doing, and they brought out a bunch of archival material and pictures and like demos and albums. And when you were watching it, it was really cool to see your work at like the front of the room, in front of Billy and Jimmy talking. So it's almost like your work captures a time in history. Is that something you think about when you're in these moments, when you're capturing the moment? Like, this is going to be, an artifact. You're capturing the general zeitgeist of the era.
Well, I wasn't thinking about that then. And it's only looking back. It's the same with if you go out to your garage maybe and you find a shoebox full of photos, and you remember the day you took that photo, but maybe you didn't really think a lot about it. But now that photo carries a lot of weight with you for any number of reasons. Maybe the people in that photo are no longer here with you on the material plane, as it were. So that resonates more with you. And I mean, with the Smashing Pumpkins, that guitar, I never knew the significance of that guitar until that piece came out on that. And I was like, oh wow, that's interesting.
That was a moment.
Yeah, I mean that was pretty wild. And I dropped Billy a note actually, and sent Billy a print of that, and we chatted a little bit about that. And but yeah, I mean it's weird, as the years go on, the significance that can have. You're photographing something at the time. You don't know who anybody is or isn't going to become. I mean, just as much as somebody is like, oh wow, you photographed Maynard of Tool very early on, but you didn't necessarily know that they were going to become what they became, or Pearl Jam or Smashing Pumpkins.
You're just capturing it there.
You're just there. I mean, it's like that not Bill, but Steve Jobs class talk he gave to the graduating class is like talking about connecting the dots. Sometimes you can't connect the dots on stuff until you're looking backwards, and you got to be pretty far out there sometimes, and you're like, oh wow, this pretty amazing. And but yeah, it was cool to see that photo there. It's kind of surreal, kind of trippy, because you remember that moment still, that you were there. And I had a little bit more hair than I got today.
We all did.
So yeah.
It's funny that you bring that up, Paul, and it's not exactly the same, but my daughter yesterday brought over a stack of concert tickets.
Yeah.
And you don't get that anymore. You know what I mean? Everything's digital on your phone. You don't really have that anymore. And she handed them to me and said, hey dad, what are these? She's 10, by the way.
Sure.
And I looked at it, and it had a bunch of shows here in Rapid City from the Civic Center is what it was called at the time, with Chevelle and some of those bands. Not a lot of grunge bands, I'm not gonna lie, guys, but but similar to what you just said, Paul, but kind of brought me back to like, oh shit, that one was signed. We actually went behind the Civic Center and had Chevelle sign it. And it kind of brought me back to the memory of, well, the lead singer, he wasn't feeling that good. This is 10, 15, whatever years ago, but it brought you back exactly like what you said. And of course, a photo is totally, a little bit more, from a visionary standpoint, but still, even just the tickets themselves brought me back, Paul. So I can definitely resonate with what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, these things are memory triggers, and like music. And it's like, you could hear a song today that you haven't heard for 20 years, and it triggers something in you, and it puts you right back in a state, in a place where you were 20 years ago, who you were with, what you were doing. And I mean, photography related to music is interesting because I think, we've gotten to a place, say 30 some years out, and the folks who were there for a lot of these shows, they're coming up on 50 or in their 50s, they're empty nesters, and they want to reconnect with their youth. I mean, that music is really something special to them. Not that every generation's music isn't special, but, when you're part of that generation, it's a little bit different, and it really it hits a certain something, and it's yours. It's uniquely you, and you're part of that period of time. And I think back on that, and like I said, I was a hair metal guy. Some of that stuff I really wasn't admittedly into at the time, but I'm really glad that I photographed it. But also, with that said, I've really gotten into a lot of those bands later in life. And, people always talk about finding new music, but you're not always finding new music, but you're finding something that maybe you weren't into before for whatever reason. And now it really connects with you. I mean, I was never really into REM, but I started really getting into REM, even though I haven't photographed them in the last few weeks, and think, wow, Michael Stipe is just really a great lyricist. There's something really deep here. And you want to visit that for a while, but also, you want to visit that, from your past and see, who you were at the time when you were listening to Smashing Pumpkins, when Gish came out, Alice in Chains, when Facelift came out, who were you then? It's just like going through a photo album, but, you're going through that in your head, and that music means a lot to you.
So it's like using your images that you've captured to kind of reflect on your life and kind of that what's led you up to today. Now, more recently, I've seen that you've been posting, or you had posted some really cool shots of like pictures you've taken more recently of, I think, local bands, things that were, popping up in Michigan. What is the difference between photographing something like that versus, a giant arena show somewhere else, or, photographing something a little more contemporary versus, photographing something like Alice in Chains? Is the experience different for you, or is it pretty much the same?
I think, if you're photographing somebody who's local, I think it's really the same approach. Because after all, Alice in Chains at one point was a local band. Pearl Jam was a local band. So, I think you just, you got to connect with that music if you're shooting music. And it's not just music that I like to shoot. It's just, whatever catches your eye. If you're traveling,
your nature shots are amazing. Also.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's my wife and I got married, and I moved out here to Grand Haven, which is by the lake shore, Lake Michigan. So very fortunate, kind of a matter of steps is Lake Michigan, and to have that opportunity. And, you don't want to take that for granted. And I think no matter where you live, I think there's certain places that you take for granted that other people would really want to be. And you have to kind of take the time and appreciate that and go there and enjoy it, whether it's photography or otherwise, and just kind of, see what you connect with and what inspires you.
So speaking of being in Michigan then, Paul, when did you start traveling? Because I assume, for these big shows you do, you probably had to do some traveling around, I imagine. When did you start doing that? Like, did you stay close to Michigan for all of 91 then?
Most of the stuff that I shot was in Michigan, and would travel to Detroit, for some of the bigger shows. The landscape with that changed. So Grand Rapids is one of the bigger cities in Michigan. I can't remember if it's the third or the second biggest city, but they put up an arena in '96, Van Andel Arena, and then Grand Rapids became like a secondary market for these big shows. So they wouldn't necessarily just go to Detroit. We've got folks like Paul McCartney coming through and Elton John coming through. You wouldn't have had that 30 years ago. You would have either gone to Detroit or Chicago. And so it's kind of cool when it's all coming to your front door. And, I've got great relationships around here to be able to shoot stuff. So that's kind of a nice luxury. I'm certainly not opposed to shooting stuff in other locations. But just obviously some fantastic shows have been, coming around here and have been shooting again within the last, almost over the last year, because shows started happening again, maybe back June of 2021.
Yeah.
So, photographed Greta Van Fleet, Ghost, and then stuff like Megadeth is coming up. So, all that stuff is really kind of back in motion again, which is great, because, nothing beats live music and the energy of that with the audience.
Well, I'm going to test your brain a little bit. You told me you're turning 50 here in a few days, and happy birthday, by the way. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So we don't get to talk to many people very often, AKA never, who got to see some of our heroes back. Like, we talk about Alice in Chains all the time, right? We've had one of their their tech song. We've had Paul Figueroa on last week, who's Alice in Chains engineer, the last 3 or 4 albums. What was it like in 1991 at Alice in Chains at the Clash of Titans tour? Because I've heard Jerry talk about in quite a few interviews, and not just Jerry, but all the guys, how brutal that crowd was to Alice in Chains. So do you recall, like, was it as bad as they say it was? Because the Clash of Titans tour, do I got that right? That is one with like Anthrax, Slayer, and the other Megadeth. Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
I think Metallica or Megadeth. So and they didn't love Alice in Chains, and that's like right before Man in the Box, right as Man in the Box was starting to hit, and they, became kind of an overnight sensation.
Yeah.
I'm sure they'll, I have multiple of these questions, but I had to get to the Alice in Chains one just in case we're out of time. So what was that like? Was the crowd really as brutal as Jerry and the guys say they were?
I don't remember anything about the audience not liking them, quite honestly. I can tell you what I do remember is how incredibly powerful their set was. I mean, their set was short, but you could feel it. And, sometimes people talk about, well, this band isn't as good as the album or whatever. They were better. I mean, you could feel, the hair standing up on the back of your neck. I mean, you knew that they were pretty incredible. And, all 4 of them were just, an incredible force in their delivery. And then a few months later, they opened up for Van Halen and photographed them in Pine Knob. If my memory serves me right, there weren't a lot of people there at the beginning of their set to see them. But again, it was great, and you could feel it. And, back in that period of time, it was few and far between where you just, you could really feel the music in a certain way. And, with the Clash of the Titans, I mean, those other 3 bands, obviously, they're all great in their own right. But Alice in Chains, it was just, it was stripped down. I mean, there were no frills. There
was no wankery.
No, there was not. And they give
you a Texas word? What does that mean?
It's an English word. Basically no frills, no nonsense.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, it was the real deal. And I always keep my eye out to see if any video ever shows up from those shows. No luck so far, but you never know what shows up out there years later. But I'm grateful that I had a chance to photograph them. And then also in 91, Pantera, and kind of a similar yet different experience. And it was you forget things over time, even though I think I have a pretty good memory, and I do. But looking at the pictures of Pantera, I'm like, oh, well, holy shit, I was actually on stage with them. And
that's insane.
That shot you have of Phil you put up not too long ago, where he's like looking at you or something.
Yeah,
flipping the camera off, right?
Yeah, it's like you when you look at it, you feel like you're there.
Yeah, I mean that was in 92. They were opening for Skid Row. That was an arena show, but the other one was a small club show. Cowboys had just come out. It's just you've got on one side the energy of Pantera, on the other side the energy of the crowd, and it's just total insanity. But it's a good insanity, and it keeps you on your toes. So I mean, you're focused one end of taking photos, and then you're looking kind of over your shoulder with your other eye, making sure that nobody's going to slam into you. Yeah, I mean, that was a similar energy, very heavy energy. And it's fun looking back at all that stuff. And I had gotten a scanner in 2012, and I'd scanned in a fair amount of stuff, but not everything. And then once 2020 happened with COVID, I was like, well, I'm not going to be shooting shows for God knows how long. Why don't I just scan all this stuff in? So I scanned in probably 80, 90% of what I've got, what I thought people are going to be the most interested from when I shot from 90 to 93. And yeah, I mean, it's a real walk down memory lane with that stuff. And one of the things I guess I realized, and I don't mean to sound arrogant or anything, is, I was better than I thought I was. I had decided to not do photography at one point. It just got to be too expensive, and I didn't really see that going into a career where I was going to be able to support myself. And the magazine at the time, I started running the magazine, and I just like, I'm not going to do interviewing or photography and just focus on this other stuff. But, it was fun to revisit that stuff and see what there was. And also, I guess more importantly, see what it meant to other people, because so many years had gone by, and that stuff for almost 20 years sat in my garage in boxes. I never saw it. And some of it was in LA in filing cabinets. And I found a way to contact the guy who was representing me at the time and managed to get some of that stuff back. But yeah, there was a period that stuff was just, sitting in my garage because I didn't really have any connection to photography for quite a long period of time.
I'm really glad you got that back, because I see so many people online, definitely me included, that really love your work and will look at it pretty much every day. So it's kind of odd to imagine that potentially never kind of surfacing for everyone to see. You mentioned, of course, being on stage with Pantera, which doesn't sound like a small feat at all. Your first interview with Gene Simmons, again, similar situation. Was there ever a moment in your career, whether it was interviewing, running the magazine, or photographing someone, that just kind of blew your mind, knocked your socks off, was just like, wow, this moment is huge?
I mean, photographing people like Alice in Chains, definitely. It's not necessarily about, okay, I'm photographing them. It's more about that I'm experiencing them. And that's pretty cool. Same with, Pearl Jam, Smashing Pumpkins, and Chili Peppers. And then, I'm just thinking there's stuff that I captured that's kind of outside of those realms, like Coco Taylor, Queen of the Blues, Chicago Blues. And
legend, yeah.
Yeah, being there to have that opportunity to see somebody like that, who is incredibly important to history. And folks like Johnny Winter, seeing him play, in the 90s, there's so many, I can, look at those pictures and I can remember those shows, and it's like a time machine. And it's always cool, because sometimes you'll run across people who you didn't know, but they were at that show. So that's kind of cool. That's, it's a shared
like a
history.
Kinship.
Yeah. And I know Morrissey had come to Grand Rapids to a place called Vinyl Solution, which was like a Gen X mecca, one of those great record stores. And it's now a mattress shop, but that's how it goes.
Tragic.
Paved Paradise put up a parking lot. That was 92. And I started going through those pictures in 2012 and put those up on my personal page. And people started tagging each other on them. I was like, I didn't know those people back then, but, now 20 years later, whatever, I know them. And it's like funny it's like, okay, well, we had this shared experience, didn't know you then, or you recognize them, you see their face, and in those photos, it's like, well, they worked at like the restaurant that was on the other side of that strip mall or something, and it's like, oh wow, that's cool. And for some people, they saw pictures of people in there who they were good friends with, who unfortunately had passed away through the years, but it gave them a way to kind of revisit those people, so that's kind of cool, to be able to see them at that event. But yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of stuff, like I said, when I scanned stuff in a couple of years ago, and just kind of seeing what was there. It's just a fun trip down memory lane.
How many songs can you stay in the pit for? Is it just 5 songs, or is that not true?
Well,
is that a myth?
Actually, there's like a 3-song, no flash policy. And there's a variety of urban legend as far as why that is the way it is, whether it connected to Madonna, Bruce Springsteen, or something that Ross Halfin did, who's a very well-known photographer.
The photographer of like legend.
Yeah, he's a master. I mean, he's created some incredible images. But the interesting thing, I guess, about, say, the 3-song thing, and sometimes, they let you shoot the whole set, but it's rock and roll. I mean, it's about sweat. It's about energy. I mean, the first 3 songs, they're just kind of really finding their footing. And it's a different ball game now with digital. Many times I was the only photographer shooting stuff. Now you're going to have at least 5 people shooting stuff. And then in addition to that, a lot of these bands will sell an experience where you'll have fans who are in the pit too. And that's cool. It's a little bit more different as far as things go with the digital world of photography and all of that. And, I'll shoot film from time to time, maybe bring a film camera. I think the last time was like Rival Sons.
That's a cool act to capture with that kind of grain. It sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. I dig those guys. They got a great feel to them, and they opened up for Greta Van Fleet a couple of weeks back. And every time I see them, they're better than the last time. And they've got that energy of a 1970s band. The singer, Jay, somewhat reminds me a little bit of his voice. I can hear some shades of Paul Rogers from Bad Company.
It's that bluesy kind of, that gritty sound.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, they're a phenomenal band.
Paul, do you ever get to go to shows for fun, or is it always work?
Sure, yeah. Trying to think about, my wife and I went to see Jack White a couple of years ago. That was just for fun, and it was a great time. So yeah, definitely, enjoy just going to a show with my wife and daughter, and just experience it that way. We saw Michael Franti at a outdoor venue in the summer a few years ago. It's a really good time. I don't know if any of you guys have had a chance to see Michael Franti, but he's always, it's just always fun. It's very uplifting,
So do you get to shoot any shows that you want?
Pretty much. It just depends. I mean, there's some artists who don't want photographs for whatever reason. Jack White has been that way. Maynard from Tool.
I was gonna say, isn't Tool probably got to be similar to that, right? They don't let you have your cell phones out.
Tool's a little bit more strict as far as policies go. And I think you have to put it in context sometimes with the times, and but you don't necessarily know sometimes who's making those calls on those decisions. The artists may not know what the management's doing, and it's just kind of the way sometimes that goes. I mean, you could, be friends with somebody who's an artist, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you do whatever you want," and management's like, "Oh yeah, no, that's not going to happen for whatever reason."
That's pretty easy to believe that would happen. So when you said earlier, when you're talking about shooting Pantera 91, and I brought up, I don't know if it came across or not on your mic, but how there's a picture of Phil, I think it was flipping you off or doing something. I see.
Yeah.
So that brings up a good point. Have you ever had any bands like legitimately pissed off at you for any reason where it's just kind of awkward and ruined the whole night?
No, I mean, I think that picture of Phil, I mean, I think that's just Phil Anselmo. You know what I mean? I didn't do anything to
was his way of saying I love you. That was Phil for I love you.
He's just being a rocker. He's just being Philip H. Anselmo. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you know, sometimes there's miscommunications. I mean, I remember in the 90s there was a band. They were big on rock, moderately big on rock radio. And I was cool to shoot them, but that didn't get through to the tour manager. The tour manager was very upset and, you know, kind of motioning me towards the door and slammed the door. I think even broke the glass, but, you know, I kept my cool and was able to shoot the thing. But, you know, that, you know, once in a while, something weird like that happens. I mean, I've been in the pit before where somebody threw up the equivalent of an M80 and it blew up in the middle. It was a Skid Row show and it was pretty crazy, even made the MTV news. And sadly, some guy, I think, lost an eye. But this kid had come to the show and threw something up there. I don't understand why somebody would do that. That's just totally mind-boggling why you would want to do such a thing. But
what a drag right in the middle of the show too.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was from the pyros because you know some of the acts you kind of want to know. Okay, well, when are the pyros going off? Just so you're kind of prepared, and you're certainly not in the way. But yeah, it was just kind of a surreal moment, unfortunate moment that somebody would do such a thing. But yeah, for the most part, yeah, I've not had any issues, you know, with the bands being upset or anything like that. I mean, if somebody doesn't want to be photographed, I mean, it's just simply that they're not going to allow photographers, and that's just, you know, the policy for whatever reason.
In that also, what makes, because of course all your pictures that you put up are fantastic. They're great. They're clear. They capture an energy. But what to you as a photographer and as a fan of music makes the perfect picture? What is the thing that you're always going for?
Well, I think that you want to have some sort of emotion. You know, guitar players have always been my favorite to photograph. So
your shots of Jerry with his hair are just phenomenal.
Yeah, right. So I mean, you're getting that motion there, or you know, somebody thinking like a Robin Trower or whatever, and seeing the emotion that they communicate through their face and through their playing, or you know, just looking for that moment in being able to just kind of get in sync with the music in the moments that are there. And, you know, that's kind of what you're looking for. I mean, and that's kind of the same with any time you're photographing something, not even music, if you're just photographing something from, say, a photojournalism perspective. You know, you want to look at, can you frame this in an interesting way, or do you feel something is about to happen? And sometimes things are just absolute luck. You know, you didn't know this was going to happen or that was going to happen. And, you know, out of the corner of my eye, I was like shooting something with the Red Hot Chili Peppers a few years back. And, you know, I see Flea hits a cool jump shot. I didn't have the camera up and I just got lucky on capturing them, you know, in the air. So it's just, you know, sometimes a little bit of this, a little bit of that, you know.
Being a photojournalist, so does that mean, were you working for a different magazine or just capturing the news? What was your time spent away from photography like?
Well, I mean, I got into stuff, you know, with the internet is, was probably like around 96 or so, and the popular internet was taking off. And I did a lot of stuff with search engine optimization and kind of realized and saw what was going to kind of be the next step with that. So I kind of got out of music and any of that stuff and then got into doing software. And then it wasn't till about 2010 that I picked up a camera again and started shooting shows. I mean, I think it's good to reconnect with those things that you enjoyed in your younger years. It's good for your soul. Even if you just do it for you and you don't do it for anything beyond that, I think that's a really good, important thing to do,
And be multi-talented, apparently.
Well, I've been fortunate, I guess, in the opportunities that I have, and I don't take them for granted. And I'm also grateful for folks like you guys, who connect with those photos because those bands, that music meant something to you. So, for me, it's an honor to be part of that. And I mean, early on when I was shooting that wasn't anything that I thought of or considered, but you kind of never know where things are going to take you. So, I mean, I don't take that lightly. And I'm grateful for those who enjoy my work and, help get that out there. That does mean a lot to me.
Early on, you never would have guessed you'd be on the Chusky Boys podcast, but here you are.
You never know, but this is a good place.
History in the making.
Yes.
So you might have gave us the craziest concert story. Maybe I shouldn't say that it is, with the M80, which is insane, where a guy lost his eyeball, which is crazy. What's we sometimes go to our fans here and ask them, hey, we're gonna have so and so on the podcast. What should we ask them for you? And we didn't have a whole lot of time today, but my good friend Tom out in Orlando wants to know the craziest band story, whether it's from a band photo shoot or from a live concert. Something about like spill the beans on a band that had something crazy, whatever it was. I mean, the
brown M&Ms kind of story.
The possibilities are endless.
I mean, one thing that comes to mind, and I don't know if it wasn't from a show, is more from an interview, is just because I decided to ask it. A lot of those hair metal bands, those guys weren't really guitar virtuosos. And I'd asked one guy, well, is it true that so-and-so had studio guitarists playing all their stuff? And I was like, oh yeah, that's true. So, I mean, that's, kind of some interesting behind the scenes stuff that you would hear from people when you would talk to them.
And we don't know who the band is.
I think it was Warrant.
Oh wow! Okay.
Sweet Cherry Pie song that I love so much.
I don't know which tracks. I can't remember, but and I think there may be some stuff out there from a producer named Beau Hill, Beau Hill, who kind of talks about some of that stuff. But
in the rise and fall of what was it? That the one about the 80s hair metal, it was a documentary. It was on MTV. Is it the fall of the?
Are you talking about the one with Dave Mustaine and Ozzy Osbourne and Chris Holmes?
I think so. That would be the one.
Yeah. I think that was from like 1991 or so. Something Civilization. But
that's the one.
Yeah, apparently there were other versions or earlier versions too that chronicled punk, but the metal one, for whatever reason, was kind of a standout, and is certainly worth revisiting today. And if you haven't seen that Chris Holmes documentary that's out, kind of interesting maybe to use that as a bookend from his little thing in the pool there.
That's the exact image I was thinking of. That is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, but you can only go so hard and heavy with that stuff for so long. And I mean, in a lot of those guys will tell you that. I mean, somebody like Nikki Sixx, I mean, he was as close to the line as you could go, Slash probably too. Yeah, it's fun to, see all these guys partying hard and all that, but you're only going to get so much mileage.
As a huge Wasp fan, which is really weird to say, I feel I'm in the minority in talking about that. But it's interesting to also kind of touching on something we talked about earlier with photography, capturing that moment in history, just like that image of Chris Holmes, Nikki Sixx talking about his life.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like watching history happen.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily know how that's going to fit in, say 20, 30 years later. I mean, and now it's not just say that, it's social media. So, I mean, your friend could post something and 3 weeks later that post means something completely different. So everything is documented more with that stuff. I mean, you've got that time horizon. So you can see, well, this is how this person's life played out. And, Chris Holmes, I don't know if you saw that documentary. It's just interesting seeing him going across Europe and all that. People want to still hear him play and all that. But you can tell that, life had not been kind to him. So, your heart aches for people like that. And there's a lot of other people who are, in that same boat. And I mean, I think, kind of back with that Janie Lane thing, it's like, you're at the top of the world, you're on MTV, you're touring. And I think in the moment you think that that's going to go on forever. And that's few and far between. Most people aren't going to be the Rolling Stones, Metallica, or Kiss. Now, where I am here in Michigan, the Verve Pipe is from Brian Vander Ark, and I'd say Brian has played his cards well. He sustained himself. I mean, I think he's probably gone through some tough times, with the industry, but they've been touring again, and they've kind of come right back on cue because Gen X, they want to reconnect.
The resurgence.
Yeah, they want to reconnect with that music. And if I was a betting man, I'm betting Brian did not spend all of his money in his 20s and 30s, and that he was very intelligent and knew that, okay, I might have some lean years and I can make it through there. And then, I'm going to come back into another good season of things. And unfortunately, some people, it's like MTV Cribs and all that, it's like, what you don't realize is that's not their house. That's probably the record company's house, or, who knows? I mean,
wait, are you saying you don't use a solid gold toilet? We don't all have those?
It's gold plated.
Okay.
Gold plated. Yeah.
But I mean, it's I mean, VH1 did that show a few years ago where they got these bands back together, and that was always fascinating because oftentimes there were one or two members who were working in an office somewhere, and so that just kind of shows you how much things can shift and change.
Absolutely. Paul, I know we're already closing in on our hour here, so we're running out of time quickly. But I do have another question I've had written down here for a bit. So your gigantic body, your catalog of work, which is just amazing. Do you have one or two pictures that you just you get the kind of the butterflies, or when you see it, you really just have a smile on your face and think about like that's like some of the best work I could have ever done in my life?
Yeah, I mean, I think, a shot at James Hetfield that I took in 91, that eventually became part of an Ernie Ball guitar string campaign. I feel really good about that. I feel really good about the stuff that I took of Alice in Chains, Pantera, Smashing Pumpkins, Blind Melon, Tool for sure. Because like I said, some of these shows, you can look at those pictures and you can put yourself back into that moment. And it's like, I'll look at those shots of Maynard. I mean, that was raw. That was intense. And you can almost feel the heat of the room as I remember it when I shot it, and the energy of that. And it's fun to see that stuff. And I think I've pretty much seen most of the stuff that I shot from back then. I haven't come across anything that's been a surprise. But who knows? I mean, maybe I'll find something hidden away that I didn't know that I had. I'm still convinced that I photographed fish in '93. So, but no luck in
evidence
finding.
yet. No evidence. Huh?
No.
It's hearsay.
Your Scott Weiland picture from 2011 is out of this world. And I'm not a big rap fan, but Snoop Dogg in 2012, after you left the pit, did you have to like drive really slow going home? How was were you cross-eyed?
He's
were your
got the
eyes red?
munchies.
I don't even know where I ended up.
You stop at Taco Bell?
Yeah. I mean, he came out in a big haze of smoke 3 hours late.
It wasn't oddly enough, it wasn't a fog machine. Is that what I'm hearing?
It might have been a different kind of fog.
Speaking of 3 hours late, I remember seeing Alice in Chains open up for Guns N' Roses here at the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, like, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years ago. Have you ever photographed Guns N' Roses or Axl Rose anyways?
No. I've photographed Slash a few times, but that original Guns N' Roses band, I mean, that was something special. I mean, it wasn't built to last. It wasn't going to last, but just an amazing group, an amazing time. I mean, I did photograph Izzy probably a couple months after he left. He played a small club. I always felt like he was kind of the heart and soul of that, kind of like the Keith Richards to maybe Slash's Joe Perry.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, Guns, I mean, they're able to still be out there and play stadiums, and that's pretty amazing. And I mean, nobody thought Axl and Slash would get back together. It's unfortunate that they didn't get that original group back together. But hey, it is what it is. At least, it's some form or another. We all got to experience that back then.
I was just going to ask, is there anyone else that you haven't photographed that you would like to? Someone that you've got your eye on going, I want to take a picture of this band or act or maybe a site?
I'll tell you who I didn't photograph that I did want to photograph, but at the end of the day, you photographed who you photographed. Was Nirvana, and I don't know an answer why I didn't photograph them, because they were nearby, and I probably could have in '93, but didn't. But I would have loved to have photographed them. I mean, trying to think about like who I would like to photograph going forward. I mean. Keith Richards would be fun, he's just, the attitude.
Capturing Keith, capturing cool.
Yeah, exactly. He's timeless. Sometimes I would tell, newer or younger photographers or whatever, always make sure you shoot the opening acts, because you don't know who those folks are going to become, or maybe it's somebody from that band who goes into some other band or whatever. I mean, and then you have the chance to capture that early on. I mean, you don't know where things are going to head time wise. I mean, like I think I mentioned, some of these bands, you knew that there was a certain energy about them, and that's cool, but crazy.
Could be the first person to put them on the map, basically.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's people like Charles Peterson. He's a photographer in Seattle. He's the guy who photographed all those grunge bands before they became who they were. He went to high school, I believe, with Cobain and some of those folks. But back then, before Instagram, before all that, that photography was very important in creating that grunge image, I would say Charles Peterson is every bit as important as Jim Marshall was, who was kind of the first big rock photographer in the 60s. And, Charles is doing some pretty interesting stuff now. He's gotten into the world of NFTs with crypto and all that. I think he's doing pretty good. So he's kind of having a resurgence, and kind of right on time, with it being, 30 years later and all that. But, just as fun as it is to kind of, for me to look back on what I've shot, I really enjoy seeing other photographers work, like Charles and Ross Halfin and Niels Lozauer, who's probably, in my opinion, the most prolific rock photographer of all time. I mean, he shot all those bands in the 70s and 80s. He was Van Halen's photographer, shot all that stuff with Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses, and I definitely enjoy their work and have enjoyed crossing paths with some of those folks.
I was going to ask if you ever got to meet any of those titans of photography, like a Ross or a Mick Rock or something along those lines.
Well, Ross yelled at me once.
That's kind of cool.
But it was well deserved. I didn't know where all the pyros were at the Metallica show, and I guess I was about to step into an area which wouldn't have been so good.
You almost pulled a James Hetfield and got burned by his own pyro, huh?
Well, I had some flammable hair back then, so that would have been
Aquanet is flammable.
Yes.
You had some Chusky hair.
Yeah. And Niels Lozauer, I'll talk to a few times a year, and he's a character. There's a documentary out on him. I think it's on YouTube. It's got folks like Henry Rollins in there, and a drummer from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and some folks like Slash. But it's interesting to talk with those folks, because I mean, they were more firmly footed in the film days back then, because that's where they were. And I know Zlozauer is like kind of definitely a shifting of worlds when all that grunge stuff came in, because he was always the big hair metal guy. He was just a few feet from the Capitol Records building and all that in LA. And so, I mean, he's got some stuff he shot in Nirvana, but you can tell, neither of them were into each other. But, nonetheless, it's Nirvana.
Before we let you go, I do want to bring up a happy late birthday to Erwin, the really cute cat that you have.
Oh, thanks.
Because that cat is adorable.
Well, thanks. We appreciate that.
More
Erwin.
cats for you, JR. There you go, buddy.
Yes.
Waiting for that cat story. Every Chusky guest has a cat, and JR doesn't love cats.
Yeah, Erwin is born on St. Patrick's Day, so and he's a bit of a fighting Irishman.
He's a cute ginger.
Paul, it'd be criminal if we let you go without at least asking if you have any cool EVH Eddie Van Halen stories.
Photographed them once in '92. For me, Eddie was always the guy. Probably the reason I picked up guitar. Saw Van Halen many, many times, and then saw them on the first reunion tour with Dave. To me, I mean, I know people get into the whole thing, Van Halen with Dave and with Sammy, but I've probably more of a Dave guy, more in the Fair Warning era, but I do appreciate Sammy, kind of an OU 812 guy as far as that goes. And I mean, Eddie is a huge influence. And I mean, I think you don't necessarily even have to be a guitar player to be influenced. It's more about kind of speaking your truth and, presenting yourself the way that you want to present yourself. And that's kind of always what he's done through the instrument. And you haven't really seen a lot of other guitar players who were able to do that. So, I mean, it's a huge loss, when we lost him back in 2020. But, we fortunately have the music.
Much like the pictures, this capturing that, listening to that lives on. And I think that's been the theme throughout this this really cool conversation is everything can last, at least in this respect.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the conversation. It's been fun chatting with you guys.
What do you have coming up like in the next couple months? Anything cool?
Maybe shooting Megadeth next week and maybe Shinedown. Then from there, not sure, but there's probably going to be some cool stuff coming up this summer. Maybe ZZ Top. Sad that Dusty Hill's no longer with us.
Rip Dusty Hill.
I know. But still be fun to see Billy Gibbons. Billy's always such an amazing guy. But
are those all local shows then? Like in Michigan, are going to do any kind of traveling at all?
No travel plans at the moment, but maybe down to Chicago for some stuff. Just, kind of see. Sometimes stuff is, spur of the moment. You never know where you're going to be till you're there.
So, Paul, thanks so much, man. We know we took your time. It's getting late where you're from. Paul, how can all of our tens of thousands of Chusky fan listeners follow you and get in touch with you on social media?
If they want to just go to Paul Jendrasiak photography.com. And my last name is spelled Jendrasiak. They can find me on Instagram just at Paul Jendrasiak, or on Twitter, Paul Jendrasiak, or just do a search for me on Facebook. So pretty easy to find. But really appreciate it, guys. Really enjoyed the conversation. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much, Paul, for having us on. We appreciate you.
All right. Have a good night, guys.
Thanks, Paul.
You
Have
too.
a good one.
Take care.
Bye.
Episode 23. Dusty, you got Mr. Paul Jendrasiak on with a 12-hour notice filling in. Now, I shouldn't say filling in. He was going to jump on anyways. It was going to be a couple weeks from now, but just spur of the moment, got him on. Awesome work as always, Dusty. I don't want your head to get any bigger than it already is. So episode 23 in the books, man. Great interview. Photography. You guys really related. Carmen, definitely you for sure. Just, artists talking to artists, respecting game, if you will. But I think it was awesome. I think, don't forget, we'll have one more episode next week. And then I think we're actually going to be on hiatus for 2 weeks. Me and their Chusky Dusty are going to see Mr. Jerry Cantrell down in Denver.
Whoop, whoop. And the Goat's
be there
seeing him
next week in Texas. Yo.
So Goat's not on next
Exciting stuff.
Next week's
Yeehaw.
episode is going to be really big for the locals. Should we give a little snippet of who it is or what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think let's just say it, call it like it is, man. Dusty, what do you got?
You're gonna answer the entertainment question, the big question.
The local entertainment question, right? So we've got a brand new, gorgeous, beautiful facility called the Summit Arena at the Monument.
For the record,
Dun.
I got, was able to have the ability to go see the Rapid City Marshals, the indoor football league.
Dude, I heard that is badass. Everyone says it's
blast.
awesome.
Absolute blast. If you have an opportunity to go check that out, I think we have 3 home games in May. So nothing more for April. Check that shit out. It was awesome. Dusty, keep going.
So we have, I'm just not going to give all the details, right? But the gentleman who may or may not be in charge of influencing or straight up signing, I'm not sure how it works. We'll find out next week. The talent, if you will, the entertainment that comes to our local arena called the Summit Arena. And I think he does a great job. I've heard great things about him. Some stuff they out in the community, is people just like to play the blame game, like to pin it on whoever and whatever.
Someone's fault.
If Shinedown's coming to Casper and Billings and Sioux Falls, why can't Shinedown come to Rapid City? Well, obviously they don't know what they're doing in Rapid City. Well, that's maybe not fair. Like, let's just give the guy, give him a platform. Let's give him a platform to talk.
Get the facts.
What it's like, what it entails to bring in like Alice in Chains.
Investigative journalism at its finest.
If there's anything as a community that we should be doing to help, right? Because you can't really rely on one person.
If you want to see
make
Foghat this summer, how can we see Foghat as a community?
Take
Hey,
it
take it
easy.
If you want to see a Joan Jett impersonator, how can we get the Sketchy Goat to fly into Rapid City? How is it possible?
Where is my private jet?
Whoa.
Her impersonator
Whoa.
is
Much?
Joan Jett.
Prius
If
rental
you-
car.
If you ask my punk ass niece, as my impersonator is the Numa Numa guy, which I'm not happy about at all. I don't know if you guys know who that is. Google it later on, but don't bring it up to me after the fact because I'll get really pissed off. JR, who would you impersonate?
Would I impersonate?
Yeah.
Definitely Elvis.
Elvis.
The later years Elvis. And there is I did that for Halloween a couple years ago. It was brilliant. It was brilliant. Oh yeah.
The chances
I-
of that actually
I will get
happening.
that photo out and we will try to get it on our socials.
Socials. I
The
assume it was a
socials.
Halloween party I wasn't invited to, just like your wedding I wasn't invited to.
We don't talk
Oh,
about Kirky,
shit.
bro.
Peace.